How would you rank the individual players in Florida State's transfer portal class? I give my take on the top 10 here on Locked On Seminoles.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today's show is going to have a very important question at the end, talking about the NCAA getting sued. My thoughts on that later in the show. We're going to also discuss some of the key players that have just entered the portal, a couple of which I think Florida State is going to have some interest in. We're also going to rank the players here in just a moment, so let's get started with that. Florida State has a tremendous class so far. I note that it's way ahead of where they thought they were going to be, my guess, and it's definitely a far for where I thought it was going to be for myself, and I'm pretty happy about it. 16 players, first off, is a lot to have, and today's the 8th of January. But more importantly, I think out of that group, at least half of those guys are going to walk in, earn their spots, got to go through spring ball, but earn starting spots for the Noles, and a few will be key contributors on special teams and reserves. This is what you call building a roster, doing so real quick. I looked at the group that they have, and based on the following criteria, I have a top 10 so far. There is a building block here. There's more players to come, but I have my top 10 so far. I want your take on Locked On Seminoles YouTube page. Comment on X. You can find me at FBScout_Florida. That's FBScout_Florida. Send me an inbox. I got an open inbox. Do whatever you want. But I'm curious what your take is as well, even if it's just one player and why you think that individual will be a contributor for Florida State. First guy on my list is one that I've talked about ad nauseum. It is very easy for me, and that's Deuce Robinson. This is a young man that is a boundary receiver, but he can play flanker. You can put him at slot. Quite frankly, he is the detriment to any defensive coordinator's game plan. You don't know where he's going to line up. There are no 6'6" corners on planet Earth, never has been. And there are very few guys with his ball skills at any height and weight, let alone 6'6", 220 pounds. And Florida State needs a game changer on the perimeter. The easy comparison is obviously Johnny Wilson. I have no problem. You want to throw that out there? Fire it up. Ironically, although a loose tie, he came from Arizona State. Well, Deuce played high school football in Arizona. And then he went to Southern Cal, and now he is going to be a Florida State Seminole. So there's some interesting ties there. Obviously, Norvell and his staff did a tremendous job developing Wilson, getting him to be a National Football League player. And more importantly, looking at it, I have a feeling that played a big role in why Deuce and his father felt comfortable to come play for the Noles. Why would it not? How is he going to be a key contributor for the Noles? First things first. We discussed it, and numerous people brought this up on the Locked On Seminoles YouTube page all last year. Florida State stunk at throwing the ball down the field last year. They were bad. DJ Uiagalelei was part of that. The offensive line was a major contributor to that. And then the receivers dropped a lot of balls. How many times do we think that one of the quarterbacks for the Noles, whether it was DJU, Brock Glenn, or Luke Kromenhoek, even hesitated a tenth of a second because they weren't sure about the guy running the route? Nobody's going to tell me that didn't enter into the equation. I've been around Deuce, great guy, very highly competitive, and his stats and the way he played, he had some big catches against Notre Dame and this year. There's no doubt in my mind that he will be an instant impact guy for the Noles. I know that a lot of people are excited about him, but nobody's more excited than I am to see him play at Florida State. And again, it matters to me, the kind of person that I cover. And I will go out of my way each and every time that there's a really good football player that is also a good human being. Deuce is that guy. He will help Florida State in the locker room, in the classroom, in front of the media, and catching some of those touchdown passes. Number 2 was not a very hard pick either. Somebody else that I've talked a lot about. There is a caveat to this one. It's not just talent. There's a little bit of upside to this one, positional need, and quite frankly, familiarity. James Williams. This kid coming over from Nebraska is similar in height to Deuce, 6'6", 250 pounds. He's a pass rusher, was overlooked out of high school, ends up at Nebraska, earns some playing time, and he's a guy that can get after the quarterback despite being not the starter, but a pure pass rusher. He has a tight relationship with Pot Roast, and it's the reason he decided to transfer from Lincoln, Nebraska to Tallahassee, Florida to play for the Florida State Seminoles. That relationship is going to help the Noles in a couple of ways. Number 1, never have enough pass rushers. Let's start with the obvious. Number 2, Florida State lost, 3 guys that are true contributors at defensive end? That's a lot. You need somebody that's not just good, but also knows that system. There's the familiarity that I brought up. I think he's going to play a lot. Whether or not he starts is debatable. He still has to learn how to play the run better because he was primarily a pass rusher, if that's true. But Williams is a guy that is now multiple years into the college life. He understands the offseason. He understands what's at stake. Being at Florida State, being at a major program, yet again, Nebraska's obviously a major program too. But playing on a stage like Florida State, now that he's going to get more reps, more likely, he has a chance to be a one and done possibly. That should be his objective. 1 year at Florida State, have a tremendous year, go get 8-10 sacks, go to the draft. If he doesn't have that mindset, then I picked him too high. There's nothing wrong with him coming back another year, which he could. But I believe Williams, based on what I saw in film, what I've heard about him, and the stats, snap counts, everything involved, he could be the most impactful guy out of anyone they sign in this class. Even Deuce, it's possible because that position is so important, especially to this kind of defense where you're the stand-up outside linebacker, the jack position. He has a potential to be an All-American candidate. The question for him, does he learn the run game? He already knows how to rush passer, RPO, ball fakes, playing his key, not overcommitting. The fine line in the RPO game is very, very difficult. If Williams does that, he will most definitely be a draftable player in the spring of 2026. And we'll be talking about him going to Indianapolis at the same point next year. Number 3 on the list, this is where it came a little bit more difficult for me, but I was pretty steadfast on the top 2. But some probably surprised that I'm saying that. And I had mentioned Thomas Castellanos. I know him well. He's a great fit for Malzahn. He's a great fit, honestly, for Norvell and what the staff has done. But I still think there's a lot to see with him, and I wasn't sure what was going to be around him yet. It's not quite finished. We need to see more at the O-line for I'm set with where I want to put Thomas Castellanos when this class is completely done for the transfer portal, and he could move up. I think they still need at least one more offensive lineman to maximize him. I'm not sold on what Florida State has coming back from their offensive line. That's a big factor. And I also need to see more what happens in spring with Squirrel White, Deuce, everything, all the continuity. And finally, I need to see him be consistent as a passer. The running part is ridiculous. I've seen Thomas play for multiple years at 7-on-7, seen him play live at the high school level, seen him play live in college. One of the most gifted athletes in all of college athletics, regardless of sport. It's not really debatable if you've seen him live like I have. How well he does as a passer is the key. Post, snap, reads. You hear me talk about it in all the games throughout the season when I make my picks. This is no different. Thomas Castellanos has a chance to be elite at Florida State, but to get there, that is the key. It will be the work in the film room and on the chalkboard more than on the practice field and inside of Doak Campbell Stadium. If he masters that, he can be number 1. That is the one thing I'm curious about. Kind of like with Williams, he still has to work on the run aspect, but his job is a lot easier. It's a safer pick. Playing quarterback is really, really hard. I don't know if you could put it into finite terms, just how difficult it is. So I got Castellanos number 3. When we come back, we're going to finish out number 4 through 10 here on Locked On Seminoles. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? I've had several different times in my life where I realized that I paid for a subscription that, quite frankly, I was not using anymore. That's not a good thing, and I don't like that feeling. And I know you don't like handing out free money to other companies for free either. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place: subscriptions, spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, it's pretty simple. The subscription tracker is the easy way to use Rocket Money. You get rid of things you don't use anymore, and it will let you know, and you can get rid of them right then and there. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Next up on the list after Thomas Castellanos, Elijah Herring. This one's a little bit under the radar. It's the opposite of what I talked about with Thomas Castellanos, and I almost put him ahead of Thomas. Proven. And this is something we're going to talk about a little bit more in the show before we're done. Herring is a guy that had a lot of experience at Memphis, and he did so consistently. Consistently showing your abilities at the collegiate level, whether it's FCS, Division II, FBS, G5, I don't care. Were you a consistent player? There's at least a little bit of evidence now, and I'll just give a hint again. Florida State and other schools are leaning in this direction over the following. Some kid that's a 5-star, let's say he goes to Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas A&M, he goes to Penn State, whatever, hits the portal, but has not produced. Why do I bring this up? Several of the players that the Noles got in last year's class from the portal were really highly acclaimed out of high school, but hadn't accomplished much, if anything. And most of them did not do a lot for Florida State this past year. Not all of them. Marvin Jones Jr., who's on the move again, he had a pretty decent year, but he was inconsistent. Florida State values, as do I, players that proved it in 2024. The level is debatable, but overall, most teams, and the things that I'm hearing from different scouts, different commentators, they want guys that have made it to college and handled their business on the field, off the field, media savvy, all of it. They don't want incomplete packages out of the portal. So Herring's a guy I think could start. He could possibly be a guy that's a good special teams player, and the leadership and knowing how to handle his business is why I got him at number 4. Number 5 is Jason Jenkins. This one's a little more simple. Tennessee was pretty loaded at D-line, and I mean kind. 6'6", 280, could play strong side end. You could play nose. Flexibility helps. Three down linemen in a 2-gap scheme. If he's part of the time, he'll probably be asked to do that. There'll be multiple at Florida State, but there'll be some times goal line or situationally where they 2-gap. That's okay. He's able to handle it. He's been through college. He was a consistent performer for one of the best defensive lines, especially one of the best third down defenses, if not the best in the country for the Vols. He's seen what it looks like. Just like with Herring, he's a proven player, even though he didn't start. Again, they got a lot of good players at Tennessee. I think this is a young man that's going to help, could even start. I'd be surprised, honestly, if he didn't start at least a few games. Guys get beat up, and he will be a consistent contributor. Can't teach the length, can't teach the size, can't teach the experience, can't teach the production. Production is something you're going to hear me talk about. Until otherwise proven, that is my new thing. I'm in agreement with those that want players out of the portal that have shown their worth. Nothing wrong with that. Number 5 was Jenkins. Number 6 is another guy that was at Tennessee, and that's Squirrel White. Same deal. Last 2 years, proven. Slot receiver, he can play outside. He can fly. Florida State needs more deep threats. We talked about that with Deuce. He can go get it. If you want a speed burner, it's not going to be easy to get him. You got to show them why. Florida State sold Squirrel on it. He's a kid out of the greater Birmingham area, played at Clay Chalkville, one of the best high school programs in the state of Alabama, proven all the way around. Really good pickup for Florida State. And I bet you he catches a ton of passes. And it would not surprise me if he led the team in receptions, because Gus Malzahn will use him on screens, slants, shovel passes. Remember, those little pop passes from the quarterback to the guy coming across counts as a reception. He could catch 70 balls next year. Would not surprise me. Between him and the recovering Jalen Lucas, that is a combination I'm very, very much looking forward to seeing the Noles use, especially when both are in the game at the same time. Maybe Lucas is in the backfield. You got Squirrel playing slot. Maybe he's the flanker, comes across formation. A lot of things you can do with faking to one guy, throwing a screen to another, getting one-on-ones with very athletic players. Florida State used to be famous for that. I think we're going to see more of it in 2025. Next up, defensive side of the ball again. This one was a little bit different for me than it would have been maybe a year ago. I might have looked at this differently. Deontay McCray came from Western Kentucky, Jacksonville kid. He's got the size. He's 280 or so. Can play strong side or weak side end, I think, with his hand in the dirt. Again, versatility is important, but he's a proven player. Florida State needed D-line too. That certainly didn't hurt him in the ranking. And if you put him in the top 3, it wouldn't bother me. If you got a different list, by the way, fire away with it. I think that it's a really good idea to look at this from a perspective of everybody has an opinion. It's not easy, in my opinion, to rank these kids in general. And I get it. If you disagree with something, fire away. I'm going to talk more about this on the Discord. And I got the link here on the page. Locked On Seminoles Discord. I want to get that going and discuss it with Y fans. Like if I have a ranking you don't like, this is the place to do it. Just go to Discord and type in Locked On Seminoles. You'll find it. It's not hard. I think this is going to be a lot of fun, by the way. So McCray's a kid from Florida coming back home. He's got something to prove. Kind of like Jenkins, kind of guy like Williams. If he has a great year, there's no reason he can't go to the NFL draft. Pot Roast is a very well-respected defensive line coach. His opinion matters to scouts. If he says, hey, this kid puts in the work and he has a good year on the field, that's a chance he gets drafted. Next up, and this won't surprise anybody, I'm guessing some people thought he might be higher, Micah Pettis, offensive tackle, Ole Miss, coming over. I think he will be the starting right tackle for the Noles. Maybe he ends up at left, maybe play some guard. I don't know. But good Lord, is that young man powerful? Does he create separation in the run game? And Gus Malzahn wants to play downhill. I could have put any number of the guys in this spot or higher from the offensive line group. But the reason I went with Pettis is because of runs up the middle. And Gus likes that power football to set up the passing game, the screen game, play action. He wants to throw the football vertically. If you don't run the ball between the tackles, that's kind of hard. Next, Diamante Diggs. This one's a little more specific, and it's why I had McCray higher. I think Diggs will play the weak side, hand in the dirt spot in the 3 down. Good athlete. Played at Coastal Carolina, 6'4", 260. He's an athlete that can get after the quarterback or play the run. But I'm not sure if he's going to be able to play strong side too. I think McCray could play at least some weak side. So I gave him a slight edge. That's the only real reason here. But getting both of them in addition to Jenkins, and don't forget, by the way, the number 1 guy in a lot of ways has already been secured before the portal was open because he went to the draft and came back to the Noles, and that's Darrell Jackson Jr. Don't forget about that. He could play strong side end or nose. Florida State's D-line is going to be a heck of a lot better than what a lot of people realize. And to round out the whole list, Randy Pittman, transferring from UCF. Obviously, he knows Gus. He knows several of the coaches at Florida State because they came from UCF, personnel, etc. He's going to know the scheme. He's going to know what it's like to be in their situation in terms of 2-minute drill, pass protection. He caught a bunch of balls. He was a very valuable 3rd down asset. Curious to see how much he gets use in the backfield because the young tight ends for Florida State are really, really good. You add him, that's an experienced guy that can help them along, but he's the H-back. Can play fullback, can play in the hip, if you will, off the offensive tackles, right hip or left hip, and he can also go out wide. They put him in the slot sometimes and 4 wide to block or catch. Randy Pittman will be a divisive divisive guy for defenses because they're not going to know how to cover it. It's going to be a very, very big quandary for those teams. He's going to get single covered, but which guy do you put on him? A linebacker? If he goes out wide, do you put a linebacker on Pittman? Good luck with that. If you're in man defense, Florida State is going to be miserable for you to cover. Pittman is an example of that. When we come back, we're going to discuss Florida State's strategy on why they went this route. And it's, again, similar to what I've been talking about here. How you evaluate the portal now is so much different. Proven production. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Seminoles. And again, please comment on the Locked On Seminoles page on YouTube, and just comment in general on X. Hit me up at FBScout_Florida. Curious to hear what you have to say about that. When we come back, we're going to talk about that strategy here on Locked On Seminoles. Out of the 16 players that so far have committed to Florida State from the transfer portal, 12 of them have started at their prior institute. Not just like once, but starters. Do you see a trend here? Florida State wants to make a concerted effort to bring in guys that know what it's like. I talked about it quite a bit in the last segment, but right now, I just want you to focus on that one point as I go through these 3 questions and kind of answer some of them. And again, comment on Locked On Seminoles. It's fun to talk about these opportunities, and I think this is the right way to go. It's one of the reasons, quite frankly, that I believe Florida State has a chance to be a massive turnaround team in 2025. Proven production over possible production. That's my theory. A lot of other teams are going that route as well. Oregon, Georgia, Bama, like Isaiah Horton, the receiver from Miami, pretty darn good player. He's transferring to Alabama. They needed a proven receiver. They went out and got one. These are the types of strategies that other major programs are doing, and Florida State, quite honestly, is kind of leading the way. 12 out of 16 is an impressive number. That's 75%. To that point, I believe I found that stat on 3, but don't quote me on that. But I was just like, that is just an incredible, incredible stat. And I think it's going to pay dividends in a couple of ways. So 3 questions. Did Florida State find enough offensive and defensive fits, not just starters, to come into the school? Because there is a caveat to this. I hate bringing it up, but it's true. Who was the guy who had a ton of experience that was brought into Florida State last year and that was a dud? DJ Uyunglele. Good guy, means well, but it did not work out. He was not a system fit. So I want to talk about that a little bit in conjunction with the guys that we just had on this list and give you an example. Deuce Robinson can fit any system. Just going to skate over that one. You could play him in a traditional offense, I formation, just run play action to him in a few screens. He would be very effective. You can play him in an up-tempo offense like Gus likes to run. Doesn't matter. 6'6", 220, and they can run. They'll fit whatever. Safest pick on this list, and that's why I got him number 1. James Williams, fit. He already played in the scheme at Nebraska, and those guys came over. The DC and the D-line coach were good. Looking at Thomas Castellanos, he was recruited by Gus to UCF, and now he's at Florida State, so he brings Thomas down from Boston College. Great deal. Again, there's a fit. Then Squirrel White, Florida State needs a slot receiver. You saw what Ja'Kai Douglas did last year. Really good slot. It's proven in what they do, and Gus has had a ton of success at Auburn and at UCF, his last 2 stops, with the slot receiver. So that's just 4 examples of why, out of several different guys, I think that the fits for Florida State in this group are better than they were last year. Because, again, they went with more upside. Taking the bird in hand is my theory. Last year, Florida State, as the saying goes, they went for the 2 in the bush instead of the 1 in the bird in hand. It bought them, or it burned them. And that's not going to cover your butt year in, year out. Last year proved it. Things went off the rails quickly, and it just never recovered. Florida State needs some kind of proven commodity at every position group. And so far they have. The only one they haven't added is DB, and I'll talk about that a little bit. They may not need to. We'll talk about that more here in just a moment. Best bets to emerge right away for Florida State in this class. I think it's pretty simple. It's still Deuce Robinson. He is far and away my number one because they need a receiver that's proven, can play boundary. I really think that having Deuce out there makes it really hard to cover Hakeem Williams, another big body guy. And it also puts Squirrel White in a lot of one-on-ones. If you do not run a truly traditional corner in front of Squirrel White, which most teams don't even have a second good corner, let alone a third, good luck. That's what Florida State's going to have. I think Hakeem will be the other starter. That's my guess. It could be Jaylen Brown. It could be somebody else, but it's going to be somebody with speed. Florida State is not lacking on track speed. That I know. Maybe it's Lil Wayne McCoy. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's BJ Gibson. I don't know. But Florida State has plenty of talent at wide receiver. They'll be just fine. Finally, remaining needs. This one is debatable. There was no one position that I'm like, man, Florida State is still up against it here in the transfer portal. There's not one spot that I'm like, man, even a little bit worried. I still think they should get another offensive lineman. But again, we're not done with this cycle. There's several guys still in it. Talk more about them tomorrow. But there are also other positions too, like DB. Florida State, I think that's one of their least needs. But if there's an elite DB that for whatever reason has a connection to Coach Sertan or somebody else on the staff, maybe it's pot roast, I don't know, whoever it is, you should at least entertain that idea. Has to be somebody that wants to fit into your locker room. Is it going to demand too much in national or NIL? Name, image, and likeness. That payment is important. The chemistry there has got to be right. And also, how about another linebacker? They got the young man out of North Carolina, Lavalley. That's a really good football player, but a young one. Could they take another? Possibly. Especially, I think, if he has pass rushing capabilities and he could be a flex where he could play inside or outside and be like a speed rusher. Not saying he has to be 6'6", 250 like Williams, but even if he's 6'2", 225 and just has a penchant for getting to QB, maybe. There are a lot of different possibilities there. To that point, here are a couple of guys that are in the portal with a teeny bit of recruiting news mixed in that I want to bring up. Number one, I don't know if Florida State wants to get in on this, but I know the kid. I'm partial to him. He is number one on On3's currently available list of players in the portal, Damon Wilson. He is from Venice, Florida, big-time player, played over 300 snaps at the University of Georgia this past season. I'll share my screen here for those of you that are on YouTube, and I'll go over some of the stats for those of you listening on Spotify or any other channel for that matter. He is a really good player. Don't know what Florida State would think because they have Williams, but I just want to give an idea to everyone what we're talking about here. He played 357 snaps. That's obviously a good sign because Georgia has a lot of really good players. And out of that, I mean, he had 18 pressures. He wasn't even the starter. He had 10 stops. He had 2 sacks. I mean, this is a guy that could drop into coverage, and he's like 240, 250. There aren't many guys like Damon Wilson. And I knew Damon personally when he was at Venice. He was benching 420 in high school. He is as motivated as it gets. He's the guy that the head coach there told me flat out he would go out of his way to talk to everybody on the team. He wasn't a big-headed guy. Team player that has elite talent and is like 6'5", 240 as a nice little bonus. Yeah, I want that guy on my roster. Does Florida State have the NIL for it? I don't know. Do they want to go that route? Again, I'm not sure. But those are the kinds of players that are still available. This is just a microcosm here of all these different players. If I could take just one more guy that's in the portal, I'd take Damon because he would be capable of starting at multiple spots. You could put him at a down spot, add 10, 15 pounds, put his hand in the dirt in the 3-4, play opposite of James Williams. Oh, my goodness. That'd be nasty. Chaston Brown, just before I forget, the offensive lineman from Northside High School in Warner Robins. He's going to visit Florida State. It looks like either the 18th or 25th. There have been some people talking about him. 24/7 Noles has brought him up. They do a great job with recruiting information. That's interesting. It also brings up a question for me. Is it still true that the Noles are really in it for Ty Haywood? I believe so, but they do want another tackle, is what it also tells me, in this high school class, and they should. Mario Nash Jr., really good one. Getting a second that is a pure tackle is a great idea. Maybe even a third. The other kid they took from Atlanta might be able to play tackle as well. We'll see, but they want as many bullets in the gun as possible, and I think that's very smart. Some other news: Oregon landed Mekhi Hughes, really good running back out of Tulane. Washington got Takario Davis, one of the best corners in the country. He was at Arizona. The old staff from Arizona, many of them are up at Washington, including the head coach. That's not shocking. Noah Thomas, the A&M wide receiver, had a little bit of success, has transferred to Georgia, big-bodied guy. And the guy that I really was hoping Florida State would land has not decided on Florida State. He's going to South Carolina. Rasul Faison, the running back. That's an interesting one. Traylon Ray, a kid that Florida State has had some interest in. Tallahassee guy, he's going to be visiting Ole Miss. I think that's interesting because, Lane always gets receivers. Florida State, they try to really make an effort to get another guy home. I'd like to see Florida State get more of the Panhandle kids to stay home, especially guys from Tallahassee and the surrounding area. That's important. Curious to see what he does. Lastly, I just want to bring this up to you because there's been so much speculation about tampering, and trust me, it's going on. Got a phone call yesterday about tampering. Tampering is massive right now. The NCAA is not penalizing anybody when the information's free. It's happening all over the place. So I just want to broach this. When is a school going to sue the NCAA because they don't have the collectives, the boosters, whatever, and some SEC, Big Ten school, whatever school, could be any conference, comes and gets one of their players, and they say, because you're not penalizing anybody, we're losing our players? I think that could happen. I don't know. It's not something that's guaranteed by any means, but it could happen. Excuse me. I think this is a subject matter at some point, it's going to explode. And if just one school does it, how does the NCAA react? Does Florida State or anybody else react to that? Do they go after somebody? Does somebody come after Florida State? I don't think there's hardly anybody that has a tamper. But schools that they're in the MAC or the Sun Belt, schools that aren't tampering are the ones I'm talking about. It'll more likely be an FCS school or G5 school, not a P4, that makes that phone call to a lawyer or some law firm group and puts the screws to the NCAA. The NCAA is always in the crosshairs, whether they want to be or not. It's kind of a two-sided deal for them, and they're both bad. We don't want to tick off the schools that make us the most money, but at the same time, if we get hammered in a $100 million lawsuit because we're losing players over here at school X, that's a whole nother deal. With that, thank you very much for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in and talk some Noles with me. I'd like for you to hit that notification bell, that like button, and if you have not already, subscribe to this podcast. I really enjoy doing it. It's a lot of fun for me, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Come check out the Locked On Seminoles Discord. Just go to Discord and type in Locked On Seminoles. You'll find us pretty easy. I really appreciate that. I'm trying to get that rolling and just starting to put information. Going to be doing some stuff on some prospects coming up over the next few weeks, some videos and stuff that I shoot at different events, Battle Miami or anything else. I'm going to make sure that I put those up there first. So check out Locked On Seminoles on Discord. Everybody have a good one. I will talk to you again soon.